is to open it up for our commissioners who want to share remarks from our leadership here at the Commission as we kick off the event, starting with our Chairman Jay Clayton, and then we will go through each of our other commissioners, Peirce, Roisman, and Lee. Thank you.
Welcome to the 39th Annual Small Business Forum. I want to thank Martha Miller and the staff in the Office of the Advocate for Small Business Capital Formation. That includes Colin, Jenny, Jessica, Julie, Malika, and Todd for their significant efforts to forge ahead and organize this virtual forum. Although I would have much preferred to have been out on the road as we have in the past few years, going to Austin, Columbus, and Omaha. That's just not possible this year. And thanks to our Office of Information Technology and the good work of Martha and her strong team, we're able to meet virtually, and that's the next best thing. It's very important for us to hear from experts from around the country, hear voices from outside of Washington, D.C., and we're going to do just that today. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the current events that we've seen. In particular, very disturbing videos that are at the front of all of our minds. Couple of those videos that underscore some issues that we must deal with the pandemic that we're facing, that has placed really unprecedented stress on our economy and on our markets and on our small businesses. And that's why it's, well, more important than ever that we make every effort to hold this forum. Let me try and underline how important that is with a few statistics. There are over 1 million minority-owned businesses in the United States, but 99.9% of those businesses have less than 500 employees. I think we all recognize that COVID-19 has had a disproportionate negative impact on small businesses. And we estimate, although this is difficult to estimate, that 50% of small businesses face immediate or near-term risks due to the effects of COVID-19. We also recognize that small businesses are the engine of economic growth, and that we will need small businesses to support a post-COVID-19 economic recovery. Today, we're going to hear from a number of panelists that will lead our discussions on how we can support small businesses, including minority and women-owned small businesses and rural small businesses, and those smaller companies that are considering going public or would like to go public in the future. These are very important areas of our economy, and we need to support them as best we can. We want your ideas. We want your questions. Questions of us are very valid. Please know that we recognize that one-size regulation doesn't fit all, and that we need to tailor our regulations and our support to fit the needs of small and medium-sized businesses. So with that, I look forward to today. I look forward to hear your comments. I look forward to hear your suggestions, and we look forward to your questions. Thanks to all for attending.
Good morning, and welcome everyone to what I am pretty sure is the 39th annual, but first ever virtual Government Business Forum on Small Business Capital Formation. I attended the past two forums in Columbus and Omaha and think of them as among the best events the SEC has held. Each drew knowledgeable and diverse participants, had panels that discussed great ideas, and helped shape my own thinking and appreciation for entrepreneurship. I've been particularly looking forward to this year's Small Business Forum, and it comes at a critical time. Like many, I've been thinking a lot about our nation's small businesses and the immense challenges they have faced over the past few months. The number of businesses whose operations have been curtailed or completely shut down amidst the pandemic is staggering. While public policy efforts such as those through the CARES Act appear to have provided some help, great uncertainty still prevents many from being able to know when, how, or if they will be able to carry on their work. I know that today's agenda does not focus directly on these matters, but I'm very interested in hearing how these events have affected the way our small businesses have been able to operate, including by raising capital to weather the storm. So, I hope that those participating today will not be shy in sharing what you can, including your ideas about what regulators can do to help in the long term and perhaps in the immediate future. We may not be able to address all of these issues, but it's certainly our job to try. I see that today's agenda includes a wide array of topics and discussions will touch on all of the life stages and sizes of small businesses. We will also hear from individual founders who may have distinct experiences given their backgrounds in geography. I look forward to hearing about the successes and challenges such entrepreneurs have faced at the different points in the business lifecycle. Thank you to Martha and the hardworking team from the Office of the Advocate for Small Business for hosting today's event. Thank you to the incredible IT team at the SEC. I know that transitioning to a virtual forum was no small feat. Finally, thank you all for being with us today. I'm sure this will be a fantastic event.
Good morning, and thank you for having me at this 39th Annual Government Business Forum on Small Business Capital Formation. I wish we could all be sitting together in the same room, but I'm pleased that we're still able to meet virtually. I want to thank our small business advocate, Martha Legg-Miller, and her staff for putting together this excellent program. Martha, I miss your presence and your energy and your warmth. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone in person again when that's possible. Thanks also to all the speakers and panelists today for coming together to share your experiences and your insights. It's challenging to put together an event like this in the present circumstances, and for many, it can be challenging even to absorb the daily news and still focus on our day-to-day work. But those very challenges make it all the more important that we go forward with this event for several reasons. First, we know small businesses are particularly vulnerable right now, and it's critically important that we find ways to support them, as we did with the recent temporary crowdfunding rules. Today provides another opportunity for us to listen to and learn from small businesses and to better inform our rulemaking. Second, this forum's mandate is unique in that it called on us to engage not only with small businesses, but also with our fellow regulators. Thus, it challenges us to think about where we sit in the broader capital raising and regulatory landscape. For instance, we'll be hearing from the Wyoming County Economic Development Authority. How can the SEC work with local authorities and supplement their efforts to help small businesses? And how can we better assist with educational and other initiatives? It's more important than ever that we collaborate and work across regulatory channels to think holistically about how to facilitate capital formation for small businesses. Third, and very importantly, the agenda today highlights women and minority-owned businesses as well as rural entrepreneurs, and I'm very pleased to see that. Our capital formation solutions in this space should be premised on an understanding of the barriers that exist. It should be tailored to address those barriers. Often we take a rising tide lifts all boats approach in our efforts to facilitate capital raising, and we fail to consider the unique challenges that face these particular communities. Simply taking steps to enhance capital formation broadly does not address the underlying reasons why equal opportunities for access to capital still elude so many talented and hard-working minority, female, and rural entrepreneurs. And let's be clear, when they lose out, we all lose out. We lose their talent, their enormous potential, and their breadth of expertise and ideas. It's crucial that we listen to these voices from those communities, that we amplify those voices, and that we take the time to educate ourselves and inform our regulatory approach regarding the systemic and structural issues these communities face. This forum presents a good opportunity to do just that. So with that, I'll leave you to get on with your important agenda, and thank you all again for your time and attention on behalf of
Thank you. And next up, we have remarks from Commissioner Hester Peirce. Commissioner Peirce? It looks like we might be having a little bit of trouble with audio. So Commissioner Peirce, we are going to message you and get you on. Oh, there you are. technology, things that we're learning how to do in the virtual environment. And it looks like we need to make sure we've got an audio connection to you because I can't quite hear you yet, but I can see your face. Why don't we do this? While we're getting our audio connected for you, let's take a minute. Let's see. Nick, are we good on audio connection quite yet? If not,
I think maybe I'm live now.
I hear you.
I'm gonna just keep my remarks very brief. Thank you, Martha, and thank you to everyone who is participating in today's forum. It's been a really dynamic event in the past and one that brings together people who really care about small business capital formation and bring us lots of really valuable ideas. And I'm looking forward to today's forum in the virtual format. I think it can be really effective in this format as well. I can already see from the chat that there's a dynamic conversation going on. So I will sit back and listen to the ideas that you bring us as we think about small business in the short term, but also in the longer term, and what we can do to facilitate capital formation. So again, thank you for your ideas in past forums, and I think it'll be a fantastic forum this afternoon and packed with information for all of us. Thank you.
Well, packed is the operative word indeed, Commissioner Peirce, and thank you for joining us. What I'd like to do now is to share a video highlighting the importance of your input at this year's forum.
Engaging with you at the SEC's annual Small Business Forum provides invaluable feedback to inform our capital formation policy initiatives. In August 2019, the Commission hosted the 38th Annual Forum in Omaha, Nebraska, in the heart of the Silicon Prairie. This highlight reel showcases how the input the Commission received from speakers and the public at the forum positively impacted the rules that we are responsible for creating and updating. We heard from a number of businesses, investors, and advisors about how companies and investors are finding success. During the 2019 forum, one panelist flagged the exclusion of Indian tribes like her own from the accredited investor definition. We listened and we responded. In the December 2019 proposal to change the definition, the Commission made it clear that Indian tribes could qualify as accredited investors based upon an investable assets test. But that's not all. Over the past 3 fora, participants recommended changes to many SEC rules, including who qualifies as an accredited investor, how the offering exemptions for raising capital could be harmonized and simplified, what disclosures should be provided by smaller public companies to investors, and how the proxy process could be updated. In response to the forum feedback, the Commission has recently taken action on a number of rulemakings, including the August-November 2019 guidance, interpretations, and proposal to reform the proxy process, the December 2019 accredited investor proposal, which adds new measures for investors to qualify and participate in many exempt offerings, the March 2020 capital formation proposal, which reduces areas of friction between capital raising pathways, and following the July 2018 final rules defining smaller reporting companies, the March 2020 final rules better scale which companies qualify as accelerated filers, recognizing that one size does not fit all when it comes to public company disclosures. Over the past 3 years alone, forum recommendations are reflected in more than 10 different Commission rulemakings and policy initiatives. The perspective that you bring as participants in the marketplace who are actively making investment decisions and seeking capital are invaluable to the Commission. Thank you for taking the time to share how you think capital formation policy should evolve. We are listening and taking action, and we look forward to engaging with you at the 2020 Virtual Small Business Forum.
Thank you very much. It is now my pleasure to kick off our spotlight discussions. And our first one is on empowering women entrepreneurs, insights from investors who support women-founded companies. We're featuring today Erica Minahan, founder and managing partner of Rain Ventures, and Samara Mejia Hernandez, founding partner of Chingona Ventures. As we mentioned above, detailed biographies for speakers are on the forum webpage and they're in our virtual program. And in a minute, I'm going to hopefully be able to share a slide as these ladies get started talking today that includes their social media hashtags in case your handles, in case you wanted to follow along and to share some of the insights you learned today. I'll turn it right on over to you, Erica and Samara. Thank you.
Hi, how are you? How's everybody doing today?
Doing well.
Good. So my name's Erica Diamond Minahan. I am founder and managing partner of Rain Ventures and 1000 Angels. I have been doing early stage investing for about 15 years. For about 8 years prior to that, I was in traditional investment banking. And my specialty is investing in companies between the pre-seed stage all the way to Series B, as well as educating entrepreneurs and investors on capital strategy and how to build scalable venture fundable businesses. So great to meet you all.
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is Samara Mejia Hernandez, and I am founding partner of Chingona Ventures. Chingona Ventures is a venture fund that invests at the earliest stages, so tech companies that have raised less than $1 million in outside funding. Prior to this, I was at another venture fund based in Chicago where I invested in pre-seed to Series B companies. And then prior to that, I was at Goldman Sachs for nearly a decade during the last financial crisis, mainly in sales, but also in technology and operations. I studied my MBA here in Chicago at Northwestern University, and I have an engineering degree from the University of Michigan. So I'm excited to be here with everyone to talk about a very important topic that has been escalated in the last few weeks and is something that hopefully Erica and I can provide some color on how we've been able to fund women and minority entrepreneurs for nearly a decade.
Great. So, I think one of the big challenges that we're facing today as investors is the fact that, as you guys might probably know, women-led companies are currently receiving less than 3% of total venture capital. And you might wonder why that's the case. Well, what you may not know is that fewer than 10% of investment professionals at the top 100 VC firms are women. That's about 100 of us out of over 1,000 professionals. And to make matters even more interesting, you might not know that African Americans receive less than 1% of venture capital dollars and represent fewer than 7 investment professionals at the top 100 VC firms. So, there's clearly an issue here with lack of access to capital. And because access to capital is such a crucial component of business success, so many female and minority founders are really being denied access to this very valuable tool. At Rain Ventures, we're working to educate female and minority founders, and really any founder who's interested, on how to effectively raise capital and use it efficiently to build great companies. So although venture capital is not the right fit for every type of business, it can be crucial to success for many founders. For example, if your business can achieve scale, it has relatively low marginal costs, and has a clear path to exit through a sale or IPO, venture capital can be an essential tool for growth and wealth creation. When we educate more women on becoming entrepreneurs and investors, we really increase the landscape for opportunity. I actually started a free YouTube channel that offers investor training to both accredited investors and entrepreneurs that are looking to raise capital. I think that the more women who become investors, the more female founders are going to get funded. So I hope everybody takes the opportunity today and in the future to educate themselves and to become active participants in the early stage capital market.
Yeah, and just to highlight what Erica was saying, women do have less than 10% of the general partners costs at venture funds, which are the check writing positions. But particularly people of color and women of color actually have less than 1% of all of that. And that's reflected in who gets funded. There is a direct correlation with who's actually writing these checks into these companies and who is fundraising, right? And so we're changing that discussion, and there's a couple of things that, you know, how I think about how we can support women and minority-owned businesses. And one of them is to actually fund more women and minority general partners of these funds. So we need to change the limited partner landscape, foundations, the institutional investors, the family offices that are looking to seek funding into these funds. So that's one thing that I've seen that has changed, and that the discussions have, you know, started up again, but there's definitely more to do here. I think providing capital also at the earliest stages. Not everyone is a right fit for venture capital, but if you fit the criteria that Erica had mentioned, you know, a lot of startups have what we call friends and family rounds, where they can get their network, friends and family that can write them a 10K to 100K check. Many in the women, particularly minority founders, don't have access to that. So I know with my fund, I've gone super early to go in as the first institutional check. But we also need more angel investors to come in. And maybe that's, you know, changing the definition of what an accredited investor is. Right now, there's one definition. But, you know, having more ability to have more accredited investors, more angels, potentially more crowdfunding platforms where these individuals can actually invest. I've seen some early success for early stage companies to get that initial capital to get the business going. And then also two other things are just alternative forms of capital, which we talked about crowdfunding, we talked about venture capital, but maybe grants, maybe other forms of non-dilutive capital I've seen really work at the earliest stages. And then the last thing to that would be getting more women and minorities on in investor roles, even if it's not at the general partner level, coming in at the junior level, mentoring them, and then giving them opportunities to bring in investments to the fund, but then also putting more women and minorities on these boards. Many times these founders will look and seek for diverse capital. And at the board level, it's really important to have different perspectives that can bring in their network and help you hire more women and minorities onto your company. So those are a few things that I've seen work. Obviously, we're still in the earliest stages, but I think those are some ways that we can get more women and minority funded businesses.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, one of the things I think is really exciting is that, you know, more women are just opening themselves up to the idea of actually going out and raising capital because they're seeing other female founders get funded. And I think that's something that was very much lacking for a while. There weren't these great examples of women starting billion-dollar companies, women raising, you know, tens to hundreds of millions of dollars in venture capital. And I think that, you know, as we see more women get into the market, it takes usually 5 to 10 years for a company to mature. So, you know, it's something that takes a while for us to get used to. You're also going to see more investors just in general become more comfortable with the idea of women leading billion-dollar businesses and making that investment. And I think that, you know, as women and minorities, we really appreciate the impact of female founders getting funded, of minority founders getting funded, because they're building the products, services, and businesses that are actually serving our needs, right? If we think about, you know, in the consumer space, you know, in a lot of different areas, you know, even in technology, you had a lot of companies that were creating products for women or for minorities that were completely founded by white men. And when I first got into early stage venture capital, you know, it used to drive me crazy. I'd see, you know, a startup that was creating, you know, a new breast pump idea, and the entire founding team would be men. And I would just ask myself, you know, why is this, right? And these men would kind of come at me with a story of like, oh, well, my wife breastfed once, so hence I should be the person starting this business. So I think that, you know, for us to really see ourselves as leaders, see ourselves as innovators, feel comfortable being in roles where we're leading technology teams, we're building businesses, we're taking on the responsibility of venture capital. I think it's really crucial to how our future is going to change and, become one that's a little bit more equitable for everybody. And as Samara mentioned, I know that for a lot of the companies, so at RAIN, obviously my partner and I are both African-American women, but we've of course invested in plenty of teams that are led, even by all white men. And the amount of value that they actually get out of having us as investors and on the board is indescribable, because they're sort of seeing these, very diverse perspectives that they may not have considered from the very initial formation of the business, and it's creating value in mitigating execution risk as the company grows. And we know that right now it's so obvious in society that company culture and the way that it's established from the beginning, the way people are treated, the way female employees are treated, the way minority employees are treated, and just sort of the awareness of building that in from the very beginning, and how that can actually minimize execution risk, make a business more valuable. I know that our portfolio companies are very, very much aware of that.
Yeah, and I've seen that also in the companies that I've invested in as well. So I don't only invest in women and minorities. I have also invested in all male teams, all white male teams. But I've been able to come in and help them with their first hire, the woman hire, help this early employee get the pay that she deserved, given her work and given the comps in the space. So I do believe that it shouldn't be separate pools of capital. Women shouldn't be only fundraising from women, right? But the more we can open up these teams to these networks, and the more women and minorities that can get on these cap tables, I think that'll really obviously make a difference. So I don't know if we have a few questions in the chat room or from Twitter.
Yes, so I know that, Julie, are you there?
Yeah, I thought Julie was going to handle the monitoring questions.
No, we're passing batons in lots of different ways right now. So I know one question, we've had a lot of chats coming in about accredited investor. Curious, from your perspective, how often do you have potential investors that are not eligible to invest in your funds, or who reach out to you and they don't satisfy the net worth or the income threshold?
I would say, as somebody who's actually, just from the perspective of my firm, 1,000 Angels, which, helps accredited investors make direct investment, certainly there are plenty of people who come and are interested in educating themselves and learning, so that they're prepared once they potentially do meet the threshold. I know that there is a lot going on around sort of relaxing the restrictions, et cetera. But at the end of the day, our investors who are accredited have to realize that, this is basically a zero liquidity asset, and the, duration that you're holding this asset is at least 5 to 10 years, with a high probability of, some investments in the portfolio might go to zero. So, we do certainly get people who are interested, but I think that income and asset tests are really, really important to protect people, who may not have the financial wherewithal from, adding what can be a very risky asset to a portfolio. So while, I do think that where I would really focus on is the fact that there are actually many people who do meet the accredited investor standard who have not even considered, dipping a toe into these waters. So, I'd rather see more people pulling out from the population of folks who actually have met the accredited investor income and asset test, getting involved as early stage investors, rather than encouraging people who might not be able to withstand a loss to put capital at risk, but of course to educate themselves, before they even are maybe at that level, to understand why this asset class is important and how it might be right for them in the future.
Totally agree. I think we could start writing these checks. I'm an advisor here for an angel group called Angeles. They invest in Latino founders. And I've seen a lot that needs to happen around the education piece, right, to Erica's point. And, you know, when I worked at Goldman Sachs, I would educate people on this slice of alternative asset classes. And within this alternative asset class, this little slice of PE and VC, which is a very small slice, which I've seen some people on the chat write about. But the more we can get women and minorities writing these checks, and even if you make, you know, call it over 100,000 and writing a 10K check per year, I mean, that's something to get you knowledgeable on the space. You don't have to do it by yourself. You can work with angel groups. You can invest it through a fund if you have the means to. So I do believe that the more we can expose this community to these asset class, the more we'll be able to invest in these founders and in these funds.
And you know, I love that Samara brought this up, because one of the things that I'll always mention is, you know, as a woman, and I think you said you went to Chicago Business School in Chicago?
Northwestern, yeah.
Northwestern, okay, so I also went to Columbia Business School, and, you know, I look at my graduating class and I see so many men who started companies out of business school, who will pass or have started venture funds, and they'll sort of pass around the hat to all of their classmates. And these guys are writing checks to each other, you know, whereas for women, this just doesn't seem to happen for us. If I find that sometimes if I'm approaching, you know, another woman or community of women about potentially investing in our fund or investing in a female-led startup, they're very focused on the risk. You know, they're very focused on, you know, sort of, oh, you know, well, I don't understand it, so I can't invest. But if you ask them to give $25,000 for philanthropy,
yep,
you know, they'll happily do it. So, you know, I think really just changing the mindset about, you know, everything doesn't have to be for charity. We have to invest in ourselves. We have to feel more comfortable supporting each other with capital, you know, taking a chance on each other, taking risk on each other, and also educating ourselves so that we can support those around us, whether we're doing it in the role of entrepreneur, we're doing it in the role of investor. I hope that, you know, every person and woman and person of color that's listening today will take the opportunity to educate themselves, be able to participate in this part of the capital ecosystem, but it does require a bit of self-education, you know, a bit of sort of stepping out of our comfort zone to be able to do it. So, you know, anyone who's interested, feel free to reach out to me. I love helping people. You know, I love the idea of getting more folks involved, more knowledgeable, and particularly for women to start supporting each other the way that the guys are pretty much already doing on a very large scale.
Well, I think that's a fantastic note to give me an opportunity to plug investor.gov, which has a lot of resources from the SEC on how to educate yourself about becoming an investor, both on the risks and the opportunities there, because it's absolutely critical before you make these decisions and you jump in that you understand the importance of diversification and how does that the decisions that you're making. I think that right now we have actually got Chairman Clayton who wanted to jump in and share some additional remarks and join us. Erica and Samara, if you'll stay on the line while we bring him into the chat. But fantastic feedback today. Thank you both so much for being willing to share your time today. And as a reminder, please do keep sending us ideas for policy recommendations in the WebEx chat or by emailing smallbusiness@sec.gov. And Nick, as soon as we've got Chairman Clayton on, we will be good to go. I think I see that he is here.
Martha, am I, hi.
I can hear you. Hello.
Well, wonderful. Thanks for bringing me in, and thanks to Erica and Samara. I've been listening for about, the past 10 or 15 minutes, and just a really impressive and helpful for me, and I think probably for my colleagues here at the Commission discussion, in particular, the emphasis on an educated investor and people being comfortable investing in this space and why it's an important asset class. That's what we want. We're not, to be clear, we're not looking to open the private investment space to people who don't understand what they're getting into. We want to open the space to people who understand what they're getting into, the risks, the holding periods, people who the illiquidity, but also the potential benefits as part of an overall investment strategy, not as your only investment strategy, but part as an overall. And also knowing your knowing your management teams and knowing the types of people you are investing alongside, very important. And then last thing I'll say is, boy, I hope there's someday when gender is relevant in this type of capital raising. Gender is very important in building a diverse management team and whatnot, but the business idea should be gender neutral in my view. But just thanks, and let me ask Erica or Samara or you, Martha, if you have any questions for me while I've got the opportunity to join you.
I appreciate it, Jay. I think that for me, I just appreciate you being here today. I don't have any fun questions for you. You know that I know how to find you when I do have them. So I won't
Yes, you do.
with any really wild and crazy ones. Besides, I see that you have not gotten a haircut in a little bit during quarantine like many of us. And so I appreciate you being willing to turn on the video and join us today.
A few more days and there'll be no more video with this hair.
Well, wonderful. Well, this is a wonderful opportunity for us to pivot over, and I'm really excited to share with everyone.
Sorry, did I miss my chance to ask the question?
I'm here. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mr. Clayton. I really, really appreciate you being here and this opportunity and the feedback. And I would love to know if the government or the SEC or this specific organization has any initiatives to address what Samara and I had talked about, which was helping more minority and women-run investment firms that are investing in early-stage companies get off the ground through LP support and creation of GPs.
The answer is we don't have capital ourselves. A lot of days I wish we did to help. But yes, Martha and her team, and it really goes to the networking that you identified. Whether it's at business school or in some other venue, getting people together, educating them about the benefits of this space, making them comfortable, but not making it so they're taking too much risk. And the answer is yes, and we want to do more. I mean, Martha and her team are incredibly dedicated to this space. Martha, maybe I know I'm taking into your time, but flip over to you and you can go over some of the many resources that you've developed.
So one, we've been developing resources, but what's most important is that any resources that we have match the market need. And so we've spent a lot of time learning from how everyone from incubators to accelerators to law firm clinics, you name it, are educating companies and how we can fill gaps as regulators and make sure that people have, when you have a full toolkit, you know how each tool in the kit works. And you know what it's used for and feel very comfortable with those. And so that's been a big focus of our office. If anybody has any ideas, I encourage you to reach out to us. I think we've put our contact info up a few times, but email us at smallbusiness@sec.gov, and we want to continue making sure that the resources that we do have available here at the Commission meet you where you need them.
And I'm going to say just one more thing, which is Martha's office has been great. This discussion has been great. We know what we need. Investors who can handle the risk, who know what they're getting into and do it smartly, but our rules are too complex in identifying and filtering those investors. And to the extent we can get help with that, we're going to eliminate some of the frictions of people getting into this space. So thank you all very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Again, Samara, Erica, and Chairman Clayton, really appreciate your remarks today. I am excited to share with you our first keynote featuring Arlen Hamilton. Arlen actually recorded this earlier this week. She is founder and managing partner of Backstage Capital. So Nick, take it away with that video keynote.
Very good.
Arlen, thank you so much for making time to join us for the SEC's Small Business Forum. January seems like ages ago when we saw each other at one of, I know for me, it was the last big conference event I attended before we began social distancing. And you had just announced the late spring launch of your book, It's About Damn Time, which focuses on underestimated founders and unlocking their high potential. These are issues that I know that you at Backstage Capital and our office here at the SEC have been focused on for a long time. but which recently have been thrust with increased momentum into the national spotlight. Can you share with us a little bit about what you're trying to do with the platform you have and what messages you're working so hard to drive home?
Sure, and thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. I've been beating the drum for several years as what I consider an outsider to the venture space. Didn't know what venture capital was probably 11 years ago or so, 10 years ago or so. But for the past 9 years, I've been saying that that the stats don't match the potential that we have in this country. And I know that as a country, we want to be very competitive. And you know, it starts in school to be competitive with other people, and then it grows and grows, and then now we want to be more competitive as a country. And I think that we are missing out on a lot of talent and a lot of potential by building these barriers to entry that are mostly a facade and mostly not based on a merit. So I think that underrepresented people, I hope that one day I put myself out of business and so that we're underrepresented no more and make myself obsolete.
Good goal.
Yeah, and I just think that part of it, it's not all of it, but part of it is getting more capital and more resources into the hands of underrepresented startup founders. And so they can get back to the business of building and executing and building some of these great companies that have come out of the United States.
Wonderful. Well, along those lines, I mean, you're talking a little bit about working yourself out of a job. You have an incredible story that I think could be a keynote in of itself, which I encourage people to read up and learn more about Arlen's story. It's incredible. That would be a whole entire other keynote presentation. But for people that are looking and that know your name and they know Backstage Capital, what piece of advice do you have for someone who's looking to emulate your journey and who wants to break into, whether it is venture capital as an investor or into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I would say don't do exactly what I did. You know, don't sleep at the airport and find a way. But I did a lot of these things so that other people wouldn't have to. Hopefully I've opened some doors and brought in some ideas and minds. But I would say absolutely knowing, this is a little bit cliche, but it's so true. It'll save you a ton of years, ton of time and heartache to really understand why you're doing something, what the intent is, and what the North Star of it all is. To know, I have not stopped saying the same thing for 9 years. I want to get more funding and resources into the hands of underrepresented founders. If I didn't have that North Star, so many times this would have been too difficult. So many times I would have been knocked off course because I wouldn't have had a big enough why. And so just understanding why, it doesn't have to even be a mission-based thing. You could just say, I want to have wealth and I want to do it this way, but really have something behind it and know your why. And that goes for potential investors and potential entrepreneurs. Another thing I would say is that all of this, we have an equal stake in. All of this is ours. And so I do a do no harm sort of mantra, but other than that, you know, it is mine for the taking. This is the American dream we're talking about, and you go for it.
Awesome. Well, I think there's a perfect bridge in with you saying you wouldn't tell somebody to follow every single footstep. Arlen, you're really well known and really well respected in VC circles for your candor, what you call in your book, unapologetic authenticity. Your book, I see it on your bookshelf, the purple cover. It's on my bookshelf as well. And I think that anyone who follows you on social media or otherwise knows that you don't sugarcoat things and that you really do stand behind what you say. You're using your platform to make sure that every founder and investor, no matter their gender, sexuality, ethnicity, race, has the opportunity to build the company of their dreams. Thinking about us here today at the SEC, what do we need to be thinking about in the public sector to help advance opportunities for everyone?
I think it's, you know, just again, being holistic with it and understanding that when you're looking at policy and you're shaping policy, the people who are helping to shape that are important, and the people who are helping to execute on it, so that we can think about it broadly and not just as one group, a myopic group. But also, I think we can just double down on what's already been put into play. I know that right now, there are proposals to broaden the definition of what an accredited investor is, for instance. To me, I know the last thing I saw there was in January, and I think they were talking about it, and then the whole world just changed right overnight. So I'm not sure where it is in the process, but that is something that would change things in a very meaningful way, and it wouldn't be as unruly as some people might think. So that the idea is to change and broaden the spectrum of what an accredited investor is, so that more people have a chance to back companies, innovative companies. And so while I don't think a lot of people are just going to come in droves and just sort of start investing in more companies now that they can, because it's pretty difficult to get into funds, what you can do is have more syndicates put together. Like we have a syndicate at Backstage. You can have more angel groups put together from people who are expert in their field or have some sort of industry expertise, or that makes them a great mentor candidate for a company, for instance. So if you have more people who are in the trenches, on the front lines, doing things, who can also put in a $2,000, $5,000 check, for instance, you're going to be able to fund more of these companies that are having so much trouble getting funding because of systemic biases. So you just open it up to a whole group of people, and think of a, for instance, I know a group of financial advisors who are Black women, but they don't make $200,000 a year, so they can't invest in a $5,000 into a startup of another Black woman and give all of their expertise and go with them on the journey. Open that up, and they could start an angel group and do that. And again, it all comes back to competing with other countries, competing within the United States, and just strengthening that standard that we have.
Arlen, that's a fantastic topic, one that at the forum in recent years we've heard a lot of feedback on. It's been a topic that's on the agenda for the SEC, so a perfect note for us to wrap up on. I want to again say thank you. I know that you have a lot on your plate and a lot that you're doing right now. Thank you for not only what you're doing more broadly, but for carving out a little bit of time to share some thoughts and input with our forum participants today.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate it.
All right. What a wonderful keynote from Arlen, who I think the world of. It is now our pleasure to switch gears and to kick off our second spotlight discussion titled Rural and Thriving, Overcoming the Unique Challenges of Building Companies in Rural Communities. Today we'll feature Will Jenkins, who's an investor and entrepreneur from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, Christy Laxton, the Executive Director of the Wyoming County Economic Development Authority in West Virginia, and Nathan Ohl, who is the CEO of the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. Welcome to each of you, and thank you, Will, Christy, and Nathan, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Martha. We really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today and are excited to be able to present on Rural and Thriving and talk about some really unique both strategies and opportunities that we see in the rural environment, and obviously also open it up for questions for folks that might have some ideas or thoughts to share. I'm Nathan Woolley. I run the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, which is a national network of nonprofit partners focused on building capacity at the local level. And for us, that means really intense work in small rural and tribal communities across the country. One of the things that we wanted to start out this discussion in is, and really dive in with Christy and Will, is to talk about the disparity that we've seen in rural communities and the lack of access to capital in many rural communities across the country, but also highlight some really unique ideas and ways that rural communities are innovating and ensuring that they get access to capital in really unique ways. One of the things we've seen, obviously, over the last decade is the huge decrease in the number of bank branches across the country. Just last year, the Federal Reserve announced that rural communities were hit in a much higher rate than urban communities due to bank closures. In fact, over the 1,700 bank branches that closed in the last year, 14% of those in rural closed compared to the 9% that urban communities saw in that same time. And so we know oftentimes businesses, their first mode of opportunity to go after capital is to talk to a bank. But when there's not a bank branch in your community or even in any communities in your surrounding area, it can often be very difficult. And so we're constantly looking for new and innovative ways to drive capital opportunities, and thrilled to have Christy and Will here with us today to talk about some of the things that they've been doing. And so first I want to hand it off to Christy, who's doing some tremendous work in West Virginia. And Christy, please introduce yourself and then talk a little bit about some of the work that you guys are doing in West Virginia.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here. I'm with the Wyoming County Economic Development Authority here in southern West Virginia in Pineville, and we are kind of a non-traditional economic development authority. Most people think of economic development authorities as people that build big plants and factories, and we are in rural West Virginia, so we don't really get to do that, as 87% of our land is owned by out-of-state land holding companies that deal with timber and coal and things like that. So we decided many years ago to focus on small business and entrepreneurship. And so in 2001, we had a devastating flood that hit our county, and we were able to get some funding come down from the state of West Virginia through our Small Business Development Center, and we were able to start a small business loan fund. And through that small business loan fund, we got about a little over $2 million, and then we were able to then get some additional loan funds through USDA, through their intermediary relending program, which we actually have to pay back to them over the next few years from 2001 through 2007. And we were able to do about $3.2 million over that amount of time to small businesses in very small loans. Those were about $15,000 loans to small businesses here in the southern region of West Virginia, in a 7-county region. And we were able to expand that to now a statewide program across the state of West Virginia, and we have done $9.3 million now across the state of West Virginia. It was a truly revolving loan program from 2007 until this past year. We had not received any new funding, so it was very successful. Since the flood to 2007 and now, we look at small businesses on a very different level from any type of bank loan, community bank loan. We look at business loans as how is that application going to affect the community. So we don't look at their normal ROI or their debt to equity or just a traditional credit score. We look at the package as a whole to see how many jobs is it going to bring to the community, how is that business going to affect the community, is that business needed in the community, and things like that. So we definitely look at it in a non-traditional aspect. We take a risk. We've done loans for people that have no credit score. We've done loans for people that didn't have the best credit score, but it was a business that was needed in that community, and it's gone on to be extremely successful. So we take a very non-traditional approach in things that we have been extremely successful. So from that point, taking the initiative that we did in 2001 with the floods, and we're doing something very similar with the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have an application into Appalachian Regional Commission to do loans with that, very similar, to do that across the state of West Virginia again currently. So we just take a very different approach to what banks do. We're very different from CDFIs as well. We partner with the banks, we partner with CDFIs, but we definitely take a very different approach, and we all collaborate together to make sure that we kind of fill the gaps that others cannot fill. So that's kind of where we come from and what we do.
Thank you so much. It's great to hear about the programs that you're doing, and I want to follow up with a couple questions in just a second, but want to introduce our other speaker, Will Jenkins. Will is located in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and he can tell you the story much better than I can, but he is both a serial entrepreneur but also an investor himself. And so then not only all across the United States, but across the world, and brings those vast experiences to his own community, and has really found a home in Pine Bluff and is really starting to help revitalize some of the community, and has some great stories and ideas about how others can do the same in rural communities. So Will, I'll hand it to you.
Hear me?
Yep.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Will Jenkins. I moved to Pine Bluff about 5 years ago. Pine Bluff is centrally located in southeast Arkansas, and at one point back in the day, it was the Mecca. There's about 15 surrounding towns, cities, and all these people used to just come to Pine Bluff. We had a decline in population due to industry moving out. My wife and I just figured it was a great opportunity to take part in the revitalization of the Pine Bluff area. So we own several buildings here. I'm an entrepreneur, developer, investor, and the time is ripe. I mean, we've got a $350 million casino project that's taking place. We also have the downtown with the new streetscape and revitalization of that as well. And it makes it ripe for a huge comeback. And I'm really looking forward to it.
So, Will, when you think about the revitalization of Pine Bluff, how do you see your role, and how do you see the role of other potential investors in helping the community as they start to put that strategy in place?
Well, no risk, no reward. And unfortunately, a lot of people are afraid to invest their money at the present time because it's still under revitalization. I mean, we're probably maybe 2 years out from being done. But again, no risk, no reward. And I'm not that kind of person. I mean, I'm a visionary. I see what's going to take place here. I mean, this is one of the largest, longest main streets in Arkansas, period. And with the casino, all these people are going to start coming back to Pine Bluff. So what we need to do is give them businesses to shop at, businesses to come to, retail outlets, restaurants, bars. We need to revive the life that used to be here in Pine Bluff. And, you know, again, no risk, no reward. And I mean, back in the early 90s, I owned a telecommunications company, and I was able to sell that for about $25 million. So it's about taking a risk. And to me, Pine Bluff is not a risk. So please, come invest your money at Pine Bluff, Arkansas.
This is a great opportunity for a question. I think this is Julie Davis from the Office of the Small Business Advocate. Thank you so much, Will, Nathan, and Christy. We had a question from Janice in the chat who said, many businesses will never be a good fit for VC or even angel capital, and yet could be perfectly viable, steady growth concerns for a long term. We need more and better access for these Main Street entrepreneurs. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about this observation. It's certainly one that our office hears from many people.
Well, one thing I would say, and then I'll let Christy and Will type in if they have thoughts on this as well, but you know, one of the really important aspects of when you think about rural is that, you know, when you go to one rural community, you've really been to one rural community. Everyone's different. There's a different situation on the ground. And ensuring and understanding, as Will talked about, no risk, no reward, you got to understand what that risk portfolio is and what the opportunities might be. But you also have to be willing to be innovative in the way that you think about business, the way that you think about opportunities to invest. Part of it is understanding the local culture and the people in that community. And as Christy talked about, you know, they're making grants or loans in some cases where they don't have a credit history to go back on. And so you've got to think a little bit more innovatively. And what we know firsthand is that rural communities at their core are innovative. They have to be, because in many cases there's less resources, less people, less market opportunities. And so, you know, you've got to be willing to embrace that culture. You've got to be willing to understand the culture in the community, but you've also got to be willing to look at different investment models that fit the opportunities in those communities. Christy, did you have anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you said that great, and I'm not sure that I can add much more to that, but you know, we have definitely taken a different approach, and we were able to do that because the monies that were revolved to our funds were grant fundings, of course. So we were able to do that and take a different approach in that aspect. Some of the monies that we had were loan money, so that made it a little more you know, complicated in that aspect, but we were still able to take the mission. You know, our mission was to make sure that we wanted to look out for these communities and the economic benefits of the community. And we wanted to make sure that we could fill the gaps of, you know, what the local community banks could not do, or what the CDFI couldn't do, or, you know, was there something missing that the, you know, those angel investors couldn't fit in. And so that's what we wanted to fill, were those gaps. And so to fill those gaps, we had to take those risks. And we had to be the one that come in on the back end with the $15,000 loan and the $50,000 loan. On average, our loans run about $35,000. And there's so many, people, even on the banking industry, that they just really don't want to fool with the paperwork even to deal with a bank size, a loan that size. And so that's really where we feel like we kind of fit in that gap. And we've been told by so many small businesses across the state that, just that little bit is enough to at least get them started on their small business, and they can't find that amount of money, to even get started. And so many people look for, they need the $500,000 or the $1 million loans and things like that. And we can't do those type of loans. We do the much smaller loans, but they need that small amount to at least get started and get off the ground. So we feel like we just kind of fill that gap. And so I think that you said it well in the fact that you just have to be innovative in what you're looking at and how you can invest and take that extra risk.
And Will, any perspective, you've been in, multiple markets across the country, and obviously Pine Bluff is its own unique market unto itself. But how do you think about that and think about, your own investment strategy as you're considering opportunity?
Well, Pine Bluff is now becoming an opportunity zone. You have a lot of historical buildings here which enable you to take advantage of the historical tax credits. I recently acquired a theater here that was built in 1892. And I have a lot of people across the country that are watching me. Once I purchased that building, my phone just started blowing up with investors wanting to come take a look at the Pine Bluff area. So I'm really looking forward to the future and what it holds for Pine Bluff. With it being a rural town, that's going to come back. And it's going to take the mom and pops to bring it back, not the big box stores. So I'm really looking forward to it.
That's exactly right.
Well, Will, I think that's a fantastic note for us to wrap on. I think we could keep the conversation going. Mom and Pop, I've been to Mary Ann's Coffee Shop on Main Street, right in the middle of Pine Bluff. And so I know exactly what you mean. And one rural community does not look like every single other one. That comes from an Alabama girl. So thank you each, Nathan, Christy, and Will, for joining us today and for sharing your perspective. We're going to move into our next keynote, which is highlighting perspectives from Administrator Jovita Carranza, the head of the U.S. Small Business Administration, someone who needs very little introduction. So we'll cue that video keynote up now. Thank you.
Okay. I be done. You get.
Thank you to the Security and Exchange Commission's Office of the Small Business Advocate for your leadership in organizing this forum and for your advocacy on behalf of the small business sector. The work you do, as well as all the entrepreneurs, investors, and other leaders joining today, is more important now than ever before. From the outset of this pandemic, the SBA has been focused on quickly getting economic relief to our country's distressed small businesses and workers. Following the President's guidance, the SBA launched a brand new program to do just that, the Paycheck Protection Program, or the PPP. And by any measure, it's been a historic success. More than 4.5 million small businesses have received a PPP loan, and more than $500 billion has been dispersed to small businesses. We've been able to provide this emergency working capital directly to small businesses so they can sustain their livelihoods and keep paying their employees. And for underrepresented small businesses, this is a financial lifeline during this unprecedented period caused by the pandemic. Providing every entrepreneur the opportunity to succeed is personal to me. I was born in a working class, underrepresented community in Chicago. My parents were first-generation Mexican Americans. I started off working at UPS on the loading docks, took advantage of every opportunity to learn and advance my skills, and left the company as an executive. I retired as the highest-ranking Latina in the company's history. Today, as a cabinet member, I have the incredible honor of being in a position to make the American dream of small business ownership a reality for millions of Americans, including many in socially and economically disadvantaged communities. I'm proud to say the financial lifeline provided by the PPP went to those who need it most. Nearly 45% of all PPP loans, both in terms of volume and value, have been dispersed in low-income counties across the country. Many minority-owned small businesses face unique challenges in accessing capital. To address this, the SBA expanded the number of authorized PPP lenders to include more than 300 community development financial institutions and 170 minority depository institutions, lenders dedicated to serving low-income and disadvantaged entrepreneurs. In closing, this administration remains committed to helping distressed small businesses stay viable. When these dark clouds clear, it will be our nation's entrepreneurs and all of you, our frontline heroes, helping them access capital, who will once again lead.
Karanza, for that. It is now our pleasure to kick off our third spotlight discussion titled Stories from Founders of Color, Building Minority-Owned Companies and Raising Capital, featuring two incredible entrepreneurs, Davion Ross, co-founder and president of ShotTracker, and Savitri Wilson, founder and CEO of Resilia. The floor is yours, Davion and Savitri. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us. And so, Davion, I know we have a short period of time, so I would love to kind of just start with just a brief intro and jump right into it. Does that sound good for you?
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, you want me to start? Okay, yeah. So it's really a privilege to be here. My name is Davion Ross. I'm one of the founders of ShotTracker. We're based out of Overland Park. And we're here to talk about fundraising. So we are a sensor-based system that tracks statistics and analytics, starting with basketball for sports. And we've had the privilege of raising a little over $30 million. And, you know, just like most startups, it's been an emotional roller coaster, but it's been a fun ride. So what about you in regards to your fundraising?
Yeah, so Savitri Wilson, founder and CEO of Resilia. And as we say, we help organizations increase capacity with our software and enterprises. So think cities, private foundations, corporations, public charities scale their impact. And to date, we've raised about $10.5 million. So, you know, we're chucking around, just announced our Series A raise in mid-May, closed in mid-March. So really excited about that.
That's awesome. That's great stuff.
And so I'll jump right in with a question, and we can definitely continue the dialogue around this question. And you talked about it. You know, we're here to talk about raising capital and financing and how we built our companies. But the question I want to pose for you is, how have you crafted your financing strategy and leveraged various just areas of capital resources to build your business? So we'd love to know a little bit about that. I know that you bootstrapped your first company without, and then the second one you raised capital. So walk us through it a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, our company is a little bit different as we discussed before, right? So it's fairly complicated. It's, you know, it's a hardware-based company with software. So we've got devices that sit on the players, devices in the basketball. And for those of you that don't know, when you actually have a hardware company, there's a lot of capital that goes into, you know, the R&D process. So it's fairly capital intensive. So for us, we had to, I mean, we started off raising, you know, my co-founder and I put the first money in and we started to go through that process. But then quickly we realized, like, so for instance, there was one project that we built where we had to put a sensor in a basketball that it took a ton of R&D to get through that process. So we needed the capital. So we started off funding it ourselves. And then we started to look at like partners who would understand the vision, understand what we were trying to do and accomplish from a different perspective. And, you know, we had a couple of multifamily offices that stepped up, a few VCs, a lot of angels. So, I mean, it sometimes it's a little tough on the cap table, but we had to do what we had to do to bring in the capital. The other thing that we also tried to do was try to figure out strategically who could actually utilize our data and try to work with them to be able to help them fund it via either some partnership or sort of revenue channel that allowed us to really scale. And, you know, that's been our strategy thus far. So what about you? I mean, I know that you have a little bit of a different strategy being like software related and.
Yeah, so my first company, truly bootstrapped. We didn't take outside capital, but the success of that company allowed me to also invest the first capital that went into my tech company years later. And so from there, we began to build out our MVP. We began to build some traction and then felt that we were in a good position to go out now and raise capital. And thus we did, definitely going through the pre-seed, seed round, Series A, starting off being able to raise capital from the network that I had built. And so that's going to actually segue me into another question for you, and that's around network. And so when I tell people that I raised my first pre-seed, which is like just $400,000, and just could be different things to a lot of people on this call, and I tell them I use my network that I had built primarily through my business circles. We generally call this like a friends and family, but let me tell you, it was not my friends and family who I raised capital from. And when people say, oh, you know, immediately, particularly for founders of color or minority founders, they're like, oh, well, you had the network, you knew people. And I immediately tell them, well, that might be the case because I built my network, right? I didn't come from money. I didn't come from a last name where everyone knew, first generation college student. So yes, I definitely built my network. So I would love to talk a little bit more about like, how do you build a network and, you know, how do you begin to create these relationships?
Yeah, you know, that's an amazing point. Like, you know, I think, we see this with a ton of founders of color, right? Like, you know, they don't necessarily have the resources like within their family that they can just go and say, hey, I need $100 to start a company. It just doesn't work like that, right?
No.
So the networks are really important. I think that, I know for us, I've got like some specific examples. So after I sold my first company, just in the Kansas City region, you start mentoring, and I was fortunate to be able to be a mentor at TechStars. And being a mentor at TechStars, it opened me up to a whole world of people, right? Because TechStars has got this national global network, and you're a mentor, so you're seeing tons of companies, you're interacting with a ton of people. And, you know, that conversation allowed me to talk to the TechStars venture folks who decided, hey, this is not a fit. We don't necessarily get sports, but they hooked me up with a VC firm, which ultimately had an intern by the name of David Stern. Mm-hmm. It was his post-commissioner career, and he was an intern at this VC firm. I mean, he actually had cards that said intern. And, you know, we struck a relationship which, you know, just ended up making it work for us and allowing us to raise some funding with him being involved, et cetera. So, you know, I think it started off when you start to build your network, I think there's something about giving back the little that you have.
Absolutely.
And to interact with people, which helps to build that network even more. So, I mean, and I think what I've seen historically is that some founders have, you know, either they've done it before, so they can go and say, hey, I've done it before, and they get nothing built at $30 million valuation. Mm-hmm. In our situation, right? I mean, you know, I'm sure you have some stories about your network that led to where you are. You know, I'd love to hear about.
Yes, and this kind of ties into this question that always comes up about geography, right? And like where you are and how that impacts your funding journey. And, you know, although we have an office now in New York, I'm from Louisiana. You know, I built my company. We started based in New Orleans. And so the tech ecosystem there is very small. And so because of that, there's not a lot of capital. But my first dollars actually did come out of my community from angels who were coming together, business people, high wealth individuals who believe that we should create this ecosystem. But then I did have to go out and find capital elsewhere. And people were telling me like, oh, you should just move to San Francisco. You should just move to the Bay and build your company. Otherwise, you're probably not going to raise money. You're not going to be able to find or access capital. And so what will you kind of tell, because I know you're also building a company outside of Silicon Valley, and what will you tell other founders about doing that and how they can strategize around building a company and as well as accessing capital?
Yeah, so I think you're a perfect, I think we're both the recipe, right? But what you just said is so important. If you could actually own and be able to build, locally where people know you, where you know your name, you have to branch out and start, whether it's conferences or other places where you meet people reaching out. I think that, geography, there's advantages and disadvantages to geography, right? Yes, on the coast, there's a wealth of, capital available, VC firms, et cetera. But I also think that one of the benefits for us is that, we were able to get, we were that shiny object, right? So we were able to get the right resources from a talent pool, and funding. And, look, we're still working through some of these things.
Yeah.
I would tell people, start at home if you can. I think it's important to get out and get money. I think that's one of the benefits of COVID. COVID, which I think is probably the only one. But what COVID has done is COVID has trained us that like geography doesn't necessarily matter. We have the tools. There are things, think about it now. Instead of going to all these meetings, we're all doing Zoom meetings, WebEx meetings, etc. So I think that's what COVID has taught us, that we can be wherever we are and still execute and still build relationships. But it's good to start at home, but you've got to branch out and start building those relationships on those social platforms to get to individuals in your space that could be helpful to help you, reach your end goal.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, so let's talk about it a little bit. The impact of COVID, right? The impact of COVID, and on top of that, we obviously are seeing protests, civil unrest, the whole nine, everything that could probably happen is happening right now in 2020. And I think that in many ways, some founders were like maybe gearing up to like raise capital, and now they're just like, what should I do? How should I think about this? What is some advice that you potentially could give to other founders about like wavering or going through the storms to look on the other side? And I know it's kind of a hard question, possibly because we're both kind of going through it as we talk about it.
Yeah, this black guy right here, that's from COVID.
Yes.
No, look, I think that I think that we're all going through it, right? As I said, there's a lot of advantages. I guess when I think about it, not only the democratization of geography is a benefit of COVID, but I think if we think about like the social climate of what's going on, just the awareness about the injustice and things that are going on has been brought to the forefront, right?
Yes.
As you know, we're a sports business, so you talk about impacted.
Mm-hmm.
It has really changed the dynamic, and just to be vulnerable and upfront, like we're trying to figure it out because at one point in time we had a bunch of installs that got canceled that was scheduled from March till May.
Yeah.
We had to like shut it down because like no schools were open, and I don't think we're out of the gate right now because you have to think that like we don't have a vaccine. So there's a lot of things that are going on right now in the sports world that we are trying to figure out, and it is not easy. It is hard. But look, I think I'd love to hear kind of how it's impacted you also. But I think that it's just important to note that entrepreneurship is like this emotional roller coaster, and you're gonna get punched in the mouth, and you got to get back up. And that's part of the process. That's part of the journey, part of the experience. So tell me a little bit about some of the things that you guys have had to navigate as it relates to just COVID and just this whole climate, especially people still working in like government parks. It's got to be impacting, right?
Absolutely. So, we heavily, our enterprise product, which is kind of like our big baby, as we call it, we essentially are providing software to manage, to pull data, to create transparency around reporting for those who are deploying capital, right? So we think like cities, private foundations, public charities. And so interesting enough, we've seen almost like a boom in business because of all the activity. It's unprecedented activity happening right now in philanthropy, and funds being created and money being deployed rapidly to organizations Like Ford Foundation just announced $1 billion effort that's going to be backed by bonds, which is something that we had envisioned happening, and now COVID is actually making it happen faster, and it's making charitable organizations move faster when generally they have moved very slow. And so we have benefited from that, which is ironic because when we were fundraising, we were trying to prove that there was a space for us. And now it's like, you know, we're busier than ever. And so I definitely think that, you know, as founders, you just never know what's coming next. And particularly from the fundraising side, because of even some of the newly created funds, whether that's from Google, there are opportunities, right, for founders and minority founders to access capital that may have not been there prior. And so I definitely would like push individuals to look to those opportunities while they're out there.
Yeah, the time is now, right?
Yes. Yes.
Now. If there was ever a time,
yeah, there's a window open.
to go now, like, you know, you don't have to kick in the doors are being opened. So as founders, you got to be aggressive. You got to go ask the tough questions. You got to have the tough discussions, and you know, try to figure it out. So,
Ms. Rita?
Yes, I was going to see if there was any questions or if we were.
Yeah, sure. This is I'm Colin with the Small Business Advocate Office at the SEC, and so, you know, you guys bootstrapped your first company, and that kind of helps you to organically grow your network. You know, you have to be deliberate and intentional about it. So I'm an entrepreneur. How would I go about building that network? Like specifically, how would I do that? I haven't grown my network organically through bootstrapping. And then also, how do I find VCs that will write first dollar checks?
I can start. And so I tell founders when I was just starting my first business, I would begin to like just look at who's in the community. So who's in my community, right? Because of social media today, I want to go and like DM 5 million followers. They're respond back to you, but who's the millionaire next door, and next door being in your community. And so going to like chamber events, going to networking events, looking at conferences and seeing who is speaking on those conferences. Now everything's virtual, and so you might actually have an opportunity to reach out to people because they're at home and they have more time, so they're not traveling, to connect with them. As well as, you know, because we sell into government, I would reach out to political figures, right? And so your state rep or your city council person is literally in that position to serve you, right? Or at least they're supposed to be. And so scheduling a meeting with their aide, sitting down with them. And the thing about politicians is they know where all the money is, right? Because they have to fundraise and they have to run for elected office. And so they can tell you who are the business people, who are the community people, who has all the money, who writes the big checks. And that was kind of like my strategy early on with creating my network. What about you?
Yeah, so I think, man, I echo, you know, all the things that you're saying. The only thing that I would add are, I think it's important to like identify the different angel groups and attend some of these events, right? I think a lot of these angel groups are looking for great ideas. I think if there are situations where you can, if you have a certain expertise, you could try to find accelerator programs, different programs that where you can actually provide, you know, there's something about going into a relationship where you're willing to give. I just personally feel that you get so much more back when you go in there with like, how can I serve? How can I help? And you start interacting with entrepreneurs. I think it's come to the point where, you know, every city has like some level of entrepreneurship group or some program that you can interact with. And then, you know, on the especially seeing that none of us are traveling, you're somewhat at least limited to your geography right now. I'd say there's a lot of information out there about people who are, you know, building funds. And as I said before, the time is now, right? People are probably more open to looking at entrepreneurs and people of color to be able to fund and partner, et cetera. So I think it's really important to go and identify, you know, Google is your friend. Identify the folks that fit in your domain and fit in your space and reach out to them and have these conversations. I think attending stuff like this is great, where you get these little nuggets and tidbits that you can really start executing on and building a plan.
Yeah, and I would love to like just lift the idea of like accelerators, right? When you think about the first check that like Holland talked about, a lot of time that is coming through accelerator. Like Google announced accelerator yesterday, a virtual accelerator, in which they're going to put like $100,000 into those companies and non-dilutive. Like nobody was doing that just 6 months ago. Like no accelerator was giving $100,000 for no equity. So, yes, the window's open.
These are unprecedented times. The other thing that I think is important is also connecting with technical founders, right? So like a lot of people have great ideas, but they don't have the technical chops to be able to develop the prototype. If you could actually partner up with some technical founders, it'll allow you to get closer to the point where you have a prototype. And when you have something to show, it's a lot easier to be able to raise that capital. It's like the train is leaving, buy a ticket, let's keep it really moving. So.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Any other questions?
I think that we could ask questions all day to Dimitri and David, but we run out inevitably against the clock.
Perfect.
To borrow a lovely sports pun from Davion's industry and line. I appreciate both of you being here today, Dimitri and Davion, and sharing your perspective, particularly as you talk about navigating network challenges. That's something that we are particularly interested in and want to make sure that we understand. And your discussion about the founder's journey is actually the perfect segue, Davion, into the title of our next keynote, The Founder's Journey. So next up, we have a keynote address from Pete Flint, who currently is the managing partner at NFX, and he is famous as the founder of the real estate company Trulia, which he created and brought public after the Great Recession in 2008. So we'll cue up that keynote and launch into Pete's remarks. All right. And it wouldn't be a virtual event if we didn't have some lovely technical quirks. So we're switching over to make sure that we get Pete's video ready and queued up for everyone. So Jenny on our team should be ready to share that with you in just a minute. And this is the point in the forum program where we're switching from talking about really earlier stage access to capital in the private market. And now we're starting to look at how do you actually scale and take those companies that are good candidates and bring them to the public market. So with that, we'll tune in to Pete.
So hi, it's great to be here. My name is Pete Flint. I'm a founder, an entrepreneur, and venture capital investor. And I'll share today some perspectives of running a business through a really challenging time. And then also now as an investor, what we're looking for as investors. So firstly, the startup journey is a roller coaster, both emotionally and intellectually. From happy smiles to sleepless nights to lucky breaks and devastating screw-ups. It's often an overnight success that can last decades or more. So my journey as a founder started in 2005. I'd recently moved to the US to attend grad school. I was in Silicon Valley and was just fascinated by technology and startups. And through my own kind of home search, really became frustrated with the US real estate industry. And really, I knew nothing about real estate at the time, but I saw this problem. I knew other people had this problem, and I really vowed to fix it. So here I am with my co-founder on graduation day. And, this was a time in 2005 when Google was just going public. It was a really exciting time for that company and for search. And our initial idea was, in the same way Google helps people find information across every subject, how do we help consumers find information specifically about real estate? Helping them find information and then connect with real estate agents to help them to complete that transaction. So we launched back in 2005 with an initial website, and things were going great. This was a terrific time. We'd raised some money. We had a small team, and we were kind of building our business. And then just a few years later, this happened. The global financial collapse, which really was precipitated by the real estate industry. Mortgages, house prices were collapsing, something like a third, transactions went down by a third. We were in the eye of the storm. And I know that many companies today are similarly in the eye of the storm. This was a really challenging time for the company, for me as a leader, and for the team. And we were running out of cash. We had money in the bank, but every single month it was going down. And I really was inspired by Winston Churchill from my homeland of England with this quote: "If you're going through hell, keep going." And my own journey as a leader navigating this time was I really thought about it in three different ways. Firstly was to manage losses, understand the cash position. How can we navigate the changing situation by figuring out perhaps what we need to do to be profitable and what is the right size of team that we need to put in place. The second piece is critically important, which is it's not just about kind of surviving, it's about thriving. How can you take market share? How can you gain ground? How can you reposition your product to the needs of today's consumers, which are no doubt going to be very different? And the third piece is managing psychology, managing your own psychology as an individual leader, managing the team psychology, and managing culture in the organization. So the three areas: losses, gaining ground, and then managing psychology. That was what we went through. As a business, we grew really rapidly from our launch up until 2008. And during this challenging time, we kind of flatlined. We were sort of flailing. We were trying to figure it out. We were trying to iterate on the product. And then we managed to kind of realign the product to the needs of the market, and things took off. In 2010, we became cash flow positive. And in 2011, we failed to go public. And then 2012, we went public. And that was just an incredible milestone that we achieved after an incredibly challenging period that we went through as a business. The financial crisis created a efficiency in an organization, and it created a focus on the true things that mattered to our consumers. And throughout this journey, one of the key things that I learned was that the incredible importance of culture. And even before we wrote a line of code back in 2005, we really intentionally focused on our culture. And this, we truly saw the benefits of this back in 2008, 2009, when we were through this challenging situation. The early investment in culture reaped dividends later on. And we thought about it really in the following way as we define our culture. What is the culture we wanted to work in? What is the culture that enabled our success to attract the right people and delight our constituents? And three is, how do we differentiate? How do we use this to build a remarkable company? And that was the sort of framework that we used to identify our culture, and every company needs to find their own culture. So post the IPO, Trulia ended up merging with Zillow, a competitor turned partner, and I switched to become a venture capital investor with NFX, advising the next crop of companies. And for many companies that I see today, once they've sort of managed their losses, they've figured out that the kind of where they stand and their path to profitability, I get this question so many times. As a tech investor, what would you like to see? More growth or more profitability? And of course, this is a false dichotomy. Investors want both, but it's more complex than that. It really depends on the stage of the company, type of company, the type of network effects, and many other factors. And for many companies going through this sort of growth phase, there's this constant tightrope walk of managing growth versus profitability. If they're too profitable and not growing fast enough, then it's like they might be missing out on the opportunity. And they're not perhaps maximizing the valuation. On the flip side, they're growing too fast and burning too much money, it becomes an unattractive investment and potentially unsustainable in the future. Companies need to constantly balance this aspect of growth versus profitability. And I see this as really a glide path, a startup glide path for companies. Early days, it's all about growth. Growth is really a proxy for product market fit. And if you have to spend money to do that, and as the company matures, growth naturally moderates as a company is bigger, and profitability come into view, and this is particularly for high growth companies. But navigating this effectively and tweaking it as through the journey is critical to every startup success. So I just shared a few insights through my experience as a founder and my perspective today as an investor, but we offer a whole variety of more information, both on our website and essays, but also on our newly launched podcast from NFX. Follow us on Twitter, get email updates, and also we have resources to help founders find investors at signal.nfx.com. Thank you for your time today. It was a real pleasure, and wishing you all the best. Stay safe. Take care.
All right. Well, that is the perfect segue as we move into our next session. I am thrilled to be introducing you to two people who I think the world of as we talk about building tomorrow's public companies, exploring the path to IPO and the future of public offerings, featuring Steve Graham, who's a partner at Fenwick & West in Seattle, and Brian Levy, Chief Business Affairs and Legal Officer at Upwork in California, both of whom are also members of our SEC Small Business Capital Formation Advisory Committee. Brian and Steve, thank you both so much for being here today and for sharing some of your perspectives on the path to becoming a public company.
Well, thank you, Martha. Stephen, are you there?
While he gets queued up, it can be the two of us, Brian. How's that?
All right. That sounds great. Well, so far, very impressed with the spotlights, the keynote. So thank you, Martha, and the team for organizing all of this.
Absolutely, absolutely. I appreciate you making time and joining us from the West Coast.
Yes, my pleasure. My pleasure.
So Brian, as we kick things off a little bit, and while we're working on making sure that Steve is able to be connected, talk to me a little bit and share a little bit of your perspective and background in helping companies go public and guiding them when they are public, because you are the head legal guy at a very large public company that has quite a market presence.
Absolutely. Happy to help. And I just want to start by thanking you again. And also just to say that, the views that I'm expressing today are, my personal views don't necessarily reflect those of my employer, nor of the SEC Advisory Committee on which I sit. I think with respect to Upwork, our 2018 IPO provided us, 5 primary benefits. Certainly a long, arduous process to get there. But for us, it really served as a branding event, which I believe continues to give us more credibility, prestige with customers of all sizes. I think secondly, my employer, a company that had been formed 15 years before the IPO, and because we generally restricted stock transfers in the secondary market for a good 5 years before the IPO, going public did provide liquidity access for existing investors and employees. I think third, the IPO gave us the optionality more than anything else to more readily use our publicly traded stock if we wanted to do a stock acquisition, for example, employee retention. It also gave us the ability, for example, to handpick, what we thought were going to be buy and hold institutional investors who we wanted to receive the newly issued shares. I will say that looking back now, a number of them were much more short-term focused than we had anticipated. So I will say one of the biggest disappointments for me thus far. And then lastly, even though we didn't need to go public to raise capital, the IPO also opens up the public capital markets for additional financing, capital raising, and it also results in just higher valuations, I think, because there's no longer the illiquidity discount that's associated with the private market. And my sense is that this year's public convertible debt market has seen much better pricing for issuers than a private debt market would be priced. And just sort of lastly, in connection with our IPO process, I do think the Commission's efforts to facilitate IPOs over the past several years helped us on several fronts. First, it enabled us to, conduct useful non-deal roadshows, testing the waters meetings to get our name out there, to tell our story, and frankly, refine our messaging before the formal roadshow. Second, the initial S1 confidential filing was helpful. And lastly, the SEC comment letter process seemed more focused on substantive issues as opposed to what I view as more nitty form items that I had seen in my prior IPO experiences. So, that's a flavor, of sort of the pros of going public. And I don't know if that's helpful.
So, Brian, question for you as you're thinking about, you've got your experience going public, and I have a feeling that being right in the heart of the Valley, you've got a lot of folks that reach out to you and say, okay, we're thinking about it, but we're trying to weigh different things. What are you hearing people talk about right now as they're looking at kind of changed economic environments? I mean, I know that we have COVID-19, people aren't traveling. There's a lot that's been said about what's happening with roadshows, and we've got Steve here. Steve, welcome. I see your video. Glad that you're here. Just curious what you're thinking about kind of the evolution of roadshows and how you go about marketing pre-IPO to investors, if that's something that you're hearing people talk about.
I'm Martha. I'm assuming that was a question for Brian.
It is a question for whoever of the two of you would like to answer it, Steve.
Well, I just parachuted into cyberspace. I'm just I'm catching up.
A electromagnetic answer is always impactful, Steve. We're glad to have you.
Okay, it sounded to me like I dropped in when Brian was talking about the advantages of going public.
Yes.
So you had a question, Martha, and I'll jump in and talk about the disadvantages as soon as you finish.
Yeah, as far as what companies are doing now, I really don't have a sense, Martha. I think the investment banks and the other, the big law firms may have a better sense just because they're more repeat players in the space. But I do think it's, with the benefits come the disadvantages, and we certainly are facing some of those now. But that might be a good segue into Stephen sort of giving his sense of some of the negatives of being public or thinking about going public.
Sure. Let me just kind of jump into that. Everyone hears about cost, and more cost, and certainly it is a very expensive and time-consuming process, as well as an expensive and time-consuming existence. You will need a team of lawyers and accountants to assist with the drafting of the registration statement and getting it through the SEC. You'll need increased infrastructure in terms of financial and legal personnel to handle finances, communicate with the street, and deal with periodic reporting requirements. There are listing fees or other consulting fees. And by the time all is said and done, the tab for going public typically is in the range of $2.5 to $4 million. And of course, investment bankers are there to earn a fee ranging between 4 to 7% of the gross proceeds. And certain of the costs incurred in the run-up to an IPO will, of course, be permanent. The enhanced infrastructure is not going anywhere. There is the cost associated with ongoing statutory and regulatory compliance, your 10K, your 10Qs, the occasional 8K, your proxy statement, your annual meeting. There's a quarterly earnings release, establishing and complying with public company policies such as the insider trading policy, and dealing with the things that will come along in what may seem to be an endless flow. For example, wrestling with disclosure issues and Regulation FD, and addressing disgruntled shareholders. The annual cost of all of that is between $1 and $2 million. And those are just the hard dollar costs. In addition to the hard dollar costs, you need to understand that your life will no longer be your own. There will be increased investor scrutiny. You will have the street and your public share list to be responsive to. Disclosure requirements may force public disclosure of information that you would rather not ever disclose, or at least not yet, such as the key metrics of your business. You become more of an open book to your competitors. Executive compensation, security breaches, executive and board changes, unsuccessful business ventures, etc. There is also, of course, the potential for stock price volatility to have an adverse effect on employee morale, not to mention generating shareholder suits. And so you can add greater exposure to litigation and the activist shareholders to the list. And finally, there is the potential for employee turnover when they suddenly have access to liquidity, when their stock options might begin to mean something. But notwithstanding all of that, you decide to go public anyway. And in that case, you'll be spending a lot of time drafting disclosure. The reporting regime does provide for some areas of scale disclosure for small companies. And I was going to flip it back to Brian and ask what are some of the areas that where you think it makes sense to scale? And do you view any of these requirements as kind of out of whack in terms of driving shareholder value?
Yeah, thanks for that, Stephen. I definitely have, I think, two observations here. First, I think the compensation disclosure for issuers other than smaller reporting companies and emerging growth companies is burdensome and expensive. And I don't get the sense that the streamlined disclosure requirements for these SRCs and EGCs is depriving investors of meaningful information. And second, while auditor attestation of internal controls is important, it does seem like there's an opportunity for a longer phase-in period following a company's IPO, even if the issuer will otherwise qualify as an accelerated or large accelerated filer. We had to comply with SOX 404B attestation in only our second 10K after going public because the company qualified as a large accelerated filer and was no longer an EGC. And that transition was very expensive, required a ton of internal effort, especially on the heels of the very time-consuming and expensive IPO process, Steve, as you just referred to. I should note that the SEC has made good progress here, having already changed the definition of a smaller reporting company and allowing smaller companies to avoid the attestation requirement. I just think there may be more opportunity to tailor the requirements on this front. And with that, Stephen, do you have any thoughts on quarterly reporting and sort of a sense of short-termism versus long-termism, for example?
Good point. Quarterly reporting is important, and I think it generally works well. I think there's some things around the edges that I think might be useful. There is the potential for more streamlining. For example, sometimes your risk factors manage to sneak into your queue as well, and I'm of the view that 40 or 50 pages of risk factors doesn't do anybody any good. Let's figure out some kind of way to deal with that. I know that a lot of it is based in fear. If my competitors put that risk factor in, then I better put it in too. And if one paragraph is good, then 3 paragraphs has got to be even better. But as far as things that we might be thinking about, one is just note that foreign private issuers are not required to do quarterly reporting. If they are not required to do reporting, then why shouldn't domestic issuers, have be extended the same courtesy? And sometimes I wonder to what extent investors really care about 10Qs in any event. Stock price changes tend to be driven by earnings releases and calls, and not by quarterly disclosures in a 10Q.
Yeah, I agree.
But it can be hard for companies to resist managing to quarterly results instead of managing to long-term business strategy. I have always been of the view that you should do what is best for the business long-term and not be driven by the quarterly earnings call. I've never thought that the market made me do it was a very good defense.
Mm-hmm.
You have a strategy, you have a vision. Make sure you are understood by the street, and investors can invest in your company or not, based on that vision, not the near-term stock price. It's sometimes easier said than done, but you're running the business, not some outsider. And on the subject of doing what you think is best for the business and not bowing to outside forces, that brings to mind proxy advisory firms. And Brian, I just thought I might get your thoughts on these firms and related to that, what you might think of the shareholder proposal regime.
No, thanks for asking, Steve. On the first addressing the shareholder proposal, I do think it's currently far too easy to bring a shareholder proposal. I'm certainly very supportive of the SEC's proposed 14A8 amendments to increase the $2,000 minimum ownership threshold that's required now. Is just far too low, and I'm not sure that's changed in decades. I also do believe that the proxy advisory firms review governance per se in a black box and do so pretty formulaically. I think the current system doesn't account for the company's results, its stage of development, because the governance of a newly public company should look very different than a mature company, nor do I think it accounts for the company's voluntary governance improvements over time. And all this sort of tied together with the fact that large passive investment funds or the index funds have essentially handed over their voting rights to the proxy advisors. The proxy advisory firms wield a ton of power these days. So when combined with the current shareholder proposal regime, companies are being forced to make governance changes that aren't necessarily in the interest of the company, but rather the small activist stockholders. And I get the sense that large investors aren't affirmatively driving many governance changes, but rather they're voting for them after much smaller stockholders put them on the ballot and are almost unanimously supported by the proxy advisory firm. So this is a frustrating environment for a company such as ours, which has been public for less than 2 years, has customary protections for a young public company, and where there is solid stockholder representation on our board because we have several board members who hold sizable equity stakes in the company. So just some thoughts there. Maybe a little bit of a segue. Stephen, you see a lot of firms out there. Are there any types of companies, sectors of companies you see in the current marketplace who want to go public? Those who want to stay private. Give me a sense of the profile of a company you would recommend they go public or not go public if you can.
Well, good question. Yeah, and usually when these kinds of questions come up, it's the there's so many people that are just kind of ignorant, I guess, of the process, which is not surprising. This is not their life, but they have a company and their dream is to go public, whatever that means. But it sounds good and kind of establishes your brand, and suddenly it's you get all this liquidity and everything else, which as we well know, if you're not really qualified to go public and you manage to drive the process to get somebody to kind of help you get public when before you're ready, all those benefits that you thought you might realize, you don't receive, and all the disadvantages you do receive. So care needs to be used in that regard. I would think that at the top of the list would be having a solid business model. And with the qualifications needed to staff the committees required of a public company. For example, audit committee financial experts, others with financial expertise to staff the audit committee. You need a relatively clean and simple cap table, governance. Are you ready to face public company scrutiny? And tech has been leading the way, and that in that sector, an ideal profile is high revenue growth, and that would be in the defined as 30% plus. I think part of the question is who wants to go public and who doesn't, and again, the real question is there are plenty of companies across sectors who want to go public, and the real question is, do you meet the criteria? You have an unattractive story and unattractive financials. Management not ready, and just the opposite of the list that I just provided. And then I suppose there are those companies that do qualify but don't want to, and sometimes get forced to anyway because of the liquidity that is demanded by their employees and by their investors.
I think, Steve, one thing you've made very clear, there's a lot of variables that need to be considered as you're weighing the decision to go public and what you're looking at, whether it is driven by liquidity or by need to tap the market for repeat access to capital. But I just want to say thank you to both of you for sharing your perspectives. We're coming up on time, and I'm the taskmaster that's keeping us on a schedule today. So I'm going to unfortunately have to wrap this, but you've teed up a number of topics that will be very insightful for our 4 p.m. Eastern session, focused on challenges and opportunities that we can address with public companies. It is now my pleasure to switch us over into our final keynote from the day, featuring Susan Tynan, who is the founder and CEO of Framebridge. And so we've got her video queued up. And again, Steve, Brian, thank you very much for being with us today. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure.
Hi, I'm Susan Tynan, and I am the founder and CEO of Framebridge. Thank you for being here today and listening to my story about how I started and scaled Framebridge with the help of a decent amount of capital. So first, the idea for Framebridge really came from a personal problem of my own. I had 4 national parks posters that I took to a frame store, and it was intimidating and expensive, and I wound up paying $400 each to frame them. And I thought at that moment, I'm going to disrupt this industry. I'm joking. I didn't. I actually just thought, I'm never going to custom picture frame something again. But as I went on in my daily business, I realized there were things I wanted to frame. And so I couldn't drop the idea. And so at some point in my career, a few years later, I thought, I'm going to do this. And I wanted to make sure I had the tools to start. So I had all of the or enough of the web and marketing tools, but I really had to make sure I understood framing. So I took a framing course because really the big idea for Framebridge was that by aggregating demand and manufacturing centrally, we could produce high quality, truly custom framing at a lower price. And by doing that, we would open up the category and bring more people into it, actually growing demand for the overall category. And that's what we've done. So today we have about 400 employees. We framed over 1 million unique pieces. We frame thousands of pieces a day in our Richmond, Kentucky manufacturing facility. And it started with a seed round of capital that I raised from venture investors. And I was fortunate at that point in my career. I had worked for a number of startups. And so I was able to raise from venture investors who somehow knew me as a manager and my track record there. This is something I think about a lot because we do have to do a better job matching entrepreneurs with the ideas and the grit to get things done with venture investors. And we also have to make sure that their initial access to capital doesn't end there, because certainly for our story, it did not end with the seed. We wound up raising money through a Series C, $83 million in total. And along the way, the pitching changed, and the pitch became much more about our team, our talented team, and about our data, how we were doing as a company. Were we actually bringing new people into the category? Were we growing our margins with scale? We were. And also through customer proof points. As we began pitching for later rounds of funding, it became fun to go into an office and have people actually be customers, or their cousin or their receptionist said, "Oh, I love Framebridge." And so that really changed the tone of raising capital. Earlier this year, one of our late stage investors bought out the majority of the company, Graham Holdings. So we have a long-term home for Framebridge, which is really exciting because we have so much opportunity left doing exactly what we're doing. And so I look out and know we'll have thousands of employees and millions of pieces we're framing annually. And I absolutely know we're going to be the way people commemorate the things they love, which is great. I also have to give a plug for small business and the entrepreneurial spirit by bragging about our team, who in mid-March realized, when everything seemed pretty scary for our business and for the country, for the world, that we did have tools we could bring to help. We cut acrylic for a living. We put acrylic on the front of frames. And so we looked at our equipment and we looked at our supplies of acrylic, and we thought, we can make face shields. And so from the moment we had the idea to a week later, we had iterated on a prototype that we thought could work with our equipment and could really scale. And so we built 40,000 face shields, some to individuals, and then a very large order for the state of Kentucky, where our manufacturing facility is located. But we were proud to be able to help in some way at this time. So I guess we're a success story for sure, right? We truly, it started with a little bit of an idea. We raised capital, we built a business, and ultimately want to be just a big, good business, a good employer, and delivering something of value to customers. And certainly our ability to access capital as we grew is the only way this dream could.
All right. We cut that last bit of her remarks a little bit short, but appreciate Susan's thoughts as an entrepreneur based here in DC. It is now my pleasure to kick off our fifth and final spotlight discussion on small cap today, how smaller public companies overcome challenges in today's market climate, featuring AJ Crick, CFO, Secretary and Treasurer of Smith Midland Corporation, Marianne Scully, Chairman and CEO of Howard Bank, and David Wagner, President and CEO of Zix Corporation. The three of them are going to start off with a little bit of background on their companies, who they are, and when they entered the public market. Thank you very much, AJ, David, and Mary Ann, for joining us today. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Wonderful. AJ, do you want to kick us off and go first? alphabetically. You've probably been on this card before with first name.
Yeah. The A with the period always starts first, right? So I work for Smith Midland. I'm the CFO, Secretary Treasurer. Company's been in business for about 60 years. We do precast concrete products. So we manufacture, we sell, we license, we rent that. And if you don't know what precast concrete is, it's concrete that is made in a facility and not poured on site. So if you're ever driving down the road, you'll see a concrete barrier, and most likely that came from either our plant or one of our licensees' plants. So the company was private for quite some time, and then in 1995, the company determined to go from a debt structure to an equity structure and did the IPO on NASDAQ. And then in the early 2000s, we were delisted from NASDAQ, and we've been on OTC ever since. Back in 2015, we met the criteria of the top, it's roughly 450 out of 10,000 OTC companies to be on the OTCQX platform. And it has been tremendous for us. It's been a great place to get some liquidity for our investors. So I guess that's kind of our story, and we'll get more into that. So Dave, I think you're next in line alphabetically.
All right, thank you. Thank you, AJ. My name is Dave Wagner, President and CEO of Zix Corp. Zix is a leading provider of cloud email security, productivity, and compliance solutions for businesses of all sizes. We service about 30% of the hospitals in the United States, 31% of the banks and credit unions. So the mid-market buyer of compliance-oriented solutions is really the market vertical that we're focused on, the customers that we service. We have about $214 million of annual recurring revenue, about 540 employees. We just celebrated our 30th year on the NASDAQ, so quite an old public company for a micro-cap company. We raised $100 million in the late 90s to get the company started. We ended up buying back shares over the late 2000s, 2009 to 2015. And then last year we raised $100 million in a PIPE offering. Our passion right now as it relates to the investment community is ESG. We've spent a lot of time thinking about ESG, working on ESG, and have earned the ISS ESG Prime designation as a company in the top decile for ESG. And so looking forward to talking to you more about the issues we face as a long-time public company. Marianne?
Sure, I'll get started. So Howard Bank is a $2.5 billion bank headquartered in Baltimore. We're very focused on people and place. So we work with SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises that are based either in the greater Baltimore region or in the greater Washington areas and Philadelphia areas immediately contiguous to those. So the irony in our business model is that we focus exclusively on privately held, very often family-owned businesses. Started the bank in 2004, so we're a young company, and became an SEC registrant in 2012 and listed on NASDAQ at that point in time. We've done a couple of capital offerings, two independently, one associated with an acquisition, and we've also grown the capital base that you need for $2.5 billion in assets through some whole bank acquisitions. But while we are focused on and respectful of family-owned businesses, we decided in 2012 that we needed to be an SEC registrant in order to have access to the kind of capital that you need to be relevant to business owners, impactful in your communities, and in order to be totally transparent. A number of banks that started early in the 21st century had a strategic business model that basically went along the lines of, we'll start, we'll raise some capital, and then we'll sell. And we wanted to have at least the option to do something other than that for a longer term basis. And so we needed to focus on optionality for our original shareholders, a way for them to, on their own and on their own time frame, to liquidate their investments. and make those initially illiquid investments more liquid. We've been very happy with the SEC registration and with the public world. We're a highly regulated company, and so that means some of the quarterly requirements and the transparency just comes naturally by virtue of being a regulated industry. But we believe it's given us that access to capital. It's given us that transparency that our shareholders want. It's given them the optionality. Clearly, as a micro cap, that doesn't mean that you necessarily have the liquidity that sometimes your shareholders want. But that's something that we believe is ultimately, again, on an optional basis, only available as an SEC register. So I don't know how David and AJ, I know a little bit how you've experienced the liquidity challenge as a micro cap, but you know, I'd ask you to comment on how you found that challenge.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that one. So for us, you know, we're $50 million in revenue. So, you know, the word microcap takes on a bigger and bigger company every year. So we're in the nano cap space is what we call it around here. So, you know, you talked about raising money, but, you know, as I said, we're on OTCQX, which is a secondary trading market. So it's not really a platform for raising capital per se. We just have it because there's a little bit of liquidity for investors, but it's a major, major challenge. It being so small, you know, we're trading, our average daily volume is roughly 5,000 shares. So it's not a lot. You know, it takes a long time to get in a big position, and it takes a long time to get out of a big position. So definitely a lot of challenges there being in that nano cap space. What about you, Dave?
Well, you know, so we're a step up from that, but still very much in the microcap space. Our maturity has allowed us to get some analyst coverage, which we have about 6 covering analysts now, which is certainly helpful. But the market has changed so much. I was a public company CFO for more than a decade, starting 10 years ago. And what I noticed coming back into the public market in 2016 is how much the ETFs and the algo traders have changed the complexion of what we are facing in the public market. And so the volatility that is sometimes created by those phenomena where we get basketed in with cybersecurity stocks or basketed in with software stocks, and then as a small company get moved around sometimes disproportionately as those positions move, creating a lot of volatility. So you know, we've had a great experience being a publicly listed company for a long time, but one of the challenges we're facing now is this the volatility as the character of the shareholder base has changed. Mary,
yeah, I think it's an interesting perspective. I mean, we, because of the growth that we've had, are close to a 200 million market cap, probably around 186 now. But one of the interesting dynamics of our market capitalization is that the last acquisition that we did was of a privately held company that had recapitalized themselves a few years before and had relied on a few institutional investors or private equity funds. So first of all, our market cap has been impacted by any very large shareholders. And we found those large shareholders and the traditional institutional shareholders, plus our original retail shareholders going back to 2004 and going back to one of the companies that we bought that had a retail shareholder base, have helped to offset that general trend. But we've certainly seen in the last year, let's call it the good and the bad of being in an index for a Russell 2000 company. And the good news is that does give us more visibility. We're covered by about 4 institutional analysts. And that also gives you more of a platform for liquidity. But the minute you're in an index, you're now beginning to be part of those index funds and in turn part of the index. And what we've seen in the last year, and in particular with the challenges of the pandemic, that the ETFs are playing a more and more dominant role, I think, in all of our lives. And that is difficult because basically it means that rather than having institutional or retail shareholders who can take that transparent information, you give them, parse it, talk to you. We're obviously very accessible, both as a microcap and as a community bank. But the ETFs are not talking to you. They're basing all of this purely on a group of metrics and, to your point, David, on industries rather than on the unique characteristics of a company in an industry.
Yeah, and maybe a derivative of that phenomenon, Marianne, we're talking about is the proxy advisors then, and how many of the votes are driven by proxy vote. How are you finding that in your business?
We've been challenged, and we've never had a proxy advisor who's done anything other than support our proposals. But having said that, I think that I would agree with one of the previous panelists who indicated that there are now some institutional investors, not all, but some, who have completely abdicated their own role, again, in analyzing the specifics of your governance. They're looking at a chart and they're checking boxes. The proxy advisors, I think, theoretically provide a very useful role, but I think that the way that they execute occasionally leaves a lot to be desired. You tend to have sometimes very junior people, again, using more of a checkbox formula rather than an actual analysis. There are a lot of rules around whether or not and when and how you can speak to proxy advisors. Again, we're not built as a company to not be able to talk to our stakeholders. And the proxy advisors at this point are stakeholders. And I think there are also some conflicts that some of the proxy advisors have in terms of additional services and analyses that they would like to provide, but understandably their business model doesn't allow them to provide that free of charge. And so there are some potential elements of conflict. So proxy advisors for us, part of the game. We're happy to be in the game. I think sometimes the execution leaves something to be desired. And I know that the SEC is going to be playing more of a role going forward in providing them with the same sort of boundaries that they provide all of us, which we think is a good thing, and we've been supportive of that.
Yeah.
Hey y'all, this is Julie. We've got a question that I wanted to lob into you. We've had a couple folks ask about the fact that the SEC's reporting regime provides for some areas of scale disclosure for smaller companies such as yours. And I know you've talked a little bit about that opportunity to scale. But we got one particular question asking if you view any of the requirements as being out of whack in terms of the shareholder value it drives, whether there's maybe some other areas that you would like to see scaled, or if you think they're appropriate.
AJ, you're the smallest in terms of market cap. What would your thoughts be?
Yeah, so, from us, I'm in a department with 5 people. So, it all falls onto my lap. I wear, I'm CFO, Secretary, Treasurer, IR, you name it, I'm there, I'm on the production floor. So it can be a burden being as small as we are. However, I will say a lot of the disclosure that we put out there has drawn a lot of investors. So just the MD&A that's required, that actually does help us quite a bit, because a lot of times if I'm on the shop floor, an investor is going to call in and I'm not going to be able to answer the questions immediately, right? So for us, even though it's a burden, I think it is a very useful tool, filing quarterly, all the required filings. But, as again, I have all the same filing requirements as, Dave and even bigger companies. So that is fairly tough.
Yeah, it's not so much the scaling. I think it was Marianne that really emphasized this. Transparency is something that we're moving to a more and more transparent world, and so we recognize that at Zix, and we're embracing that at Zix, and we serve compliance-oriented buyers, and so they want that transparency from us. But it's more the changing regulations that in accounting practices, when they change, it creates a lot of extra work. And so I think there are a lot of things that that the FASB thinks about and they think it's going to help shareholders, and maybe it does. But lease accounting rule changes and run a team back through, every contract we have, and sales compensation, ASC 606 changes. It's the changes that put the bigger burden on the team that I find. And I wonder if sometimes we don't just change for change's sake, as opposed to recognizing the value of being consistent and following through and letting companies mature into the processes. It's the change in processes what stresses my team.
So David, I would agree, but let me ask if you agree with this. I think it's less the fact that the SEC registration requirements are that you need to report quarterly, and I'm always very appreciative of the small issuer exceptions. I could make some distinctions that I know, again, we file quarterly reports for our regulators as well, for the FDIC. They have some interesting rules on their quarterly call reports where some things are only reported every 6 months and some things are only reported annually. So there's a skeleton of the information that's always going to be useful to an institutional investor, but other pieces that might be reported less frequently. So it lets you toggle that balance between transparency and the cost. But I would agree with you, and I think that the fact that the SEC provides information quarterly isn't in and of itself a challenge. It's what goes with that. I mean, we've had many sudden changes or long anticipated, but perhaps unwise changes that FASB has imposed on our industry as well. And it's those changes, rather than the fact that you have to report them quarterly, that really drive a lot of the issues. And then it's also, what do some people do with that quarterly information? And some of the previous panelists talked about this, but the expectation in some quarters that you're going to give earnings guidance, which tends to make you very short-term oriented unless you're passionate about resisting. And we do try to focus very much on a long-term strategy. But it can be difficult when you're providing not only quarterly retrospective information, but you've got people that then want you to take out your crystal ball and tell them what's going to happen 6 months from now. So it's the unintended consequences rather than the reporting itself, I think. And I think that's what you're saying in terms of the FASB rules as well.
Well, Mary Ann, you say the crystal ball, I think is a perfect segue. I've got a good crystal ball that you have all three teed up incredible thoughts for this afternoon's discussion on ways that people can develop recommendations and address some of these challenges. I think that 20 minutes is nowhere nearly enough time to delve into how do we actually solve all of them, but you've teased out a lot of wonderful issues today. So thank you all very much for joining us, and I hope that we can continue this important conversation later this afternoon. So today, to recap, we've heard from a number of thought leaders with fantastic insights, and now it is your turn as our participants in the forum to take what you've heard, as well as the unique perspectives that each of you bring, to help shape recommendations for how the rule book should change to meet evolving market demands. As you will have guessed, if you've participated in an SEC event before, the fantastic perspectives you've heard today should be attributed to the speakers, not necessarily the commission or commissioners. And please feel free to keep sharing some of the wonderful ideas that you've heard on social media and tagging the speakers using the handles flag in our forum program. Please also continue to think about ideas, chat those into the WebEx or email smallbusiness@sec.gov. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Colin Caleb. Colin, are you here?
Thank you, Martha. So next up, we'll have a 15-minute break, during which we hope you'll take a moment to pause, reset, stretch, reflect on what you've heard thus far today. And after the break, we'll start our first policy development session at 2:45, focused on exempt offerings and the capital formation proposal. This session is the venue to bring up topics we've heard about today, such as the accredited investor definition, harmonization of the exempt offering rules, guidance on demo days, crowdfunding,
Regulation A, mini IPOs, and finders. So after session one, we'll start session two at 4 p.m. on the path to IPO and small cap company perspectives. This session is the venue to bring up topics we've heard about today, such as public company disclosures, SOX 404B, research coverage, secondary liquidity, and other topics highlighted today. Both of those sessions are accessible solely through WebEx given their interactive nature. Registered participants should have a unique link in their inbox. For more details on how to participate, head over to our forum webpage.
Wonderful, and thank you very much. So before we head over to the break, I want to take a moment and I want to thank the team who has been working behind the scenes tirelessly to make this event possible. So that includes our team that's shown on the display here, as well as our Office of Information Technology, Nick Bain, whose name you've seen on screen, and our Office of Public Affairs team, who made sure you knew about this event and could engage with us. In the U.S., I think we have the myth of the solopreneur. We like to attribute things to one leader. You've seen my face a lot today. There is no such thing as the solo entrepreneur who's leading things, nor is there such a thing as a really small team pulling off a big and heavy lift. So special gratitude to our team, Colin Caleb, Julie Davis, Jessica McKinney, Jenny Regal, Malika Sullivan, and Todd Van Laer. While we haven't been seeing each other in person and sitting in conference rooms together and working in person like we're used to since early March, we're honored to bring so many of you here today to talk about these important topics in a virtual setting. Thank you for all that you have put into making this year's forum a success, and enjoy the break for a little bit, everybody. Thank you.